Before he was John Wick, before he was even the one, Keanu Reeves took some wild cinematic swings in the 90s, and we're all about it. Hey friends, Tyler Nichols with JoBlo here, and I hope you're ready to get into some wacky 90s movies. Keanu Reeves may be one of the most likable actors in Hollywood now, but back in the day he was simply an actor trying to make it in this tough industry, and it resulted in quite the filmography. First, we're looking at what may be the worst performance of Keanu's career, but that's okay because the movie itself rocks. Francis Ford Coppola gave us an incredible retelling of the classic vampire story, and Gary Oldman gave us one of his many phenomenal villain performances. Let's see what happened to Bram Stoker's Dracula. Then we see Reeves as a data courier, only the data is in his head and it's a race for time and his own survival as the Yakuza close in on him. This is Johnny Mnemonic. Finally, we're taking a look at the time that Keanu made a deal with the devil, or at least he was tempted to. Part courtroom drama, part grooming by the devil, Keanu has to contend with an absolutely unhinged Al Pacino, and it's glorious. Don't miss out on The Devil's Advocate. Questionable accents, virtual reality, and deals with the devil. Let's take a look at the Keanu verse of the 90s.
The children of what sweet music, Dagmar.
Dear unholy night, do we need another Dracula movie? Folks have been saying this since 1992 when a new-ish writer couldn't get anyone to finance his dream project. A project that literally kept him up at night, staring longingly at the jugular in his wife's neck. Well, he found his way when a couple of nice fellows agreed to finance a TV project for him that ballooned into a full-fledged ocean and time-spanning epic, directed by the dude who made The Godfather.
You said you come into my house on the day my daughter's to be married and you asked me to do murder. Money.
This is the story of the sex-fueled, blood-sucking, weird-as-hell vampire movie that pop culture hasn't been able to shake off since. This is what the fuck happened to Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Welcome to my home.
While the story of Bram Stoker's Dracula started in 1897, and the stories that inspired it long before that, director Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula began during an unfortunate incident making The Godfather Part 3.
Friends, I have come here because our business together is done.
There were a lot of unfortunate incidents with Godfather 3, but this one involved the young actress that he'd hired becoming unable to participate due to career exhaustion.
You chased a bottle of aspirin with a bottle of vodka.
I had a headache.
Coppola had to rush to find a replacement, cast his daughter Sophia in the role, and you know the rest. That young, exhausted actress was Winona Ryder, who Coppola thoughtfully decided a year later to reach out to make sure that she knew there was no ill will over the unfortunate event. As fate would have it, one of their conversations during that meeting led to Ryder showing the director James V. Hart's script for Dracula. Hart's love for Bram Stoker's book had been a weird one. Some would argue unhealthy, as the Hook screenplay writer became so overwhelmed by a particular scene that was, in his words, so intensely erotic and diabolically evil that he passed out reading it on a plane. He recalls another night when he became overwhelmed and threw the book into his closet, only to find himself hovering over his wife at 2 a.m., staring at, again, I can only convey this in his exact words, watching the jugular pump seductively in her neck. Look, this guy really liked the Dracula book. We might need to check his backyard for bodies.
Psycho talk.
Hart reached out to the head of the English department at San Francisco State University at the time, Leonard Wolf, who had been born in Transylvania and was an expert on the subject. The two were never able to make the script work, despite their best efforts. However, Hart carried his eternal torch for the story and tried many times over the years to sell the idea to producers who were burnt out on the idea. Finally, in 1990, producers Robert O'Connor and the late Michael Apted gave him his shot to write it for them as a television film. Back to Winona Ryder, who was considered playing Mina in the film, asked her friend his thoughts on the script. A friend who would later accept an invitation by Columbia Pictures themselves to direct the film. While neither Hart nor Ryder knew that Coppola had been a fan of the novel since he was 18 years old and would read it to attendees at a summer camp that he worked for, neither were they aware that he was currently interested in entering the goth market and making a faithful adaptation of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This would allow him to make a sweeping horror epic without having to write the script himself. Hart and Coppola agreed to try and keep things as close to the source material as possible, but did make several changes to the original novel. They added an origin story for Vlad, amped up the eroticism, shifted the narrative structure, and added the romance element between Dracula and Mina. With Hart's dream job and director on the wagon, not to mention the talents of Winona Ryder as Mina,
If you seek culture, then visit a museum. London is filled.
it was time to cast the rest of the film. One of the big changes from the book to Coppola's on-screen production was the character of Van Helsing.
Yeah, she was in great pain. Then we cut off her head and drove a stake to her heart and burned it, and then she found peace.
Doctor!
Coppola called the book version of the character a fuddy-duddy and rewrote that character into a wilder, drunker, swashbuckling type. Influencing these changes would be none other than the improvisation of Sir Anthony Hopkins himself. Fresh off of an Oscar-winning performance in The Silence of the Lambs.
Sounds charming.
It's a great fit, and it comes as no surprise when you consider the ensemble cast that Coppola has put together over the years, from The Godfather to Apocalypse Now. Dracula would show off more of that prowess with the talents of Cary Elwes, Richard E. Grant, Billy Campbell, Sadie Frost, and even musician Tom Waits rounding out the inspired supporting cast.
Master, I am here. I have worshipped you.
Then there's the character of Jonathan Harker, which, of course, went to Keanu Reeves. Though today's audience's love for Reeves' performance is only surpassed by their love for what a legendarily kind human being he is.
Puppies.
The world wasn't always so welcoming to Keanu. More on that later. Now, who would play the bloodsucker with the bugle-shaped hair?
I am Dracula.
Coppola knew he couldn't find just anyone who could pull off both handsome and grotesque the way that Dracula had been built up in his mind.
Rosemary once. Ages ago, it seems.
He instead set out to hire someone who would simply be able to make it as unique and personal as possible. He wanted people to walk out of the theater saying that they'd never seen a Dracula like that before. And he knew Oldman was capable of bold swings. While the actor had never been chomping at the bit to play the character previously, he wanted to work with Coppola, and became particularly enamored with a line in the script.
I have crossed oceans of time to find you.
Oldman later recalled being able to read, "I've crossed oceans of time to find you." On screen was worth accepting the role alone. Not only did Coppola want his Dracula to look and feel nothing like had been on screen before, but he didn't want his film to look like any other Hollywood production. He hired the legendary cinematographer behind Goodfellas, Michael Ballhaus.
Got some nerve standing me up. Hell do you think you are, Frankie Valli or some kind of big shot?
To achieve the unique look of the film, and one that he was happy with. But that was not always the case, as no one on set seemed to listen when he explained that he wanted no special effects or CGI in post-production. He wanted to film it all live and in front of the camera, as you would a magic trick.
No silent camera, the way Griffith and those guys, so that the whole sequence when it starts will look like that.
Eventually, the director grew so frustrated, he fired his visual effects team and hired his son Roman instead. Because, get this, he was enthusiastic about magic.
Nerd alert!
They employed several old-school techniques to capture the shots in the film, from double exposure to composite shots that reused film multiple times to achieve the desired effects. Clearly, it worked out for the look of the film, and Coppola would later admit that he thought his son should have won an Oscar for his work on Dracula, were it not for voters at the Academy being partial to certain kinds of effects. Coppola also noted that 99% of the film was created on sound stages, even the dramatic chase scene at the end of the film, which, if you look at the scope of what was created here, seems unfathomable. Part of the drive to do so came from Coppola having issues keeping films like Apocalypse Now under budget due to extreme locations and unpredictable weather. He also admitted that he had some boyhood fears about shooting at a castle somewhere in Romania in the middle of the night. As Coppola demanded the sets remain small, and later lamented it be a battle he lost, he also required the costumes be bigger. Aika Ishioka, whose impressive work you've likely seen in eye-catching films like The Fall or The Cell, was chosen and given immense freedom to inflict her talents. Ishioka deemed the character should be male and female, old and young, ugly and handsome, animal and human. Which kind of sounds like getting my wife to decide what she wants to eat for lunch.
And for the lady, perhaps a salad?
Perhaps not.
It's complicated and confusing, and I'm a little scared.
I'm in danger.
But the result on the screen amazingly checks all those boxes somehow. The many looks of Oldman's Dracula were an ongoing process, fueled in part by Oldman himself, who would have a lot of downtime in the early days on set. Oldman got the ear of makeup designer Greg Canham and schemed the many ways that he could unveil the visuals of his demonic disposition onto the audience. While they may have came out winners in this scenario, getting multiple wild and out there versions of Dracula to feast our eyes upon, it ended up biting Oldman in the ass. Some days he would spend 7 hours in the makeup chair, 10 hours on set, then have to sit for an hour and a half just to have it all removed. This could have, in part, led to a later released awkward behind-the-scenes video of Oldman in full Drac regalia, taking a little bit of a Transylvanian shit, and then storming off in anger with a handler hilariously holding his cape. Coppola hired a talented team around to assemble the all-important look and feel of the film, but demanded that nothing be brought before him unless it were original, or, in his words, weird. While he meticulously crafted the look of the film alongside his team through storyboards and animation, he helped evolve the characters and actor cadences with staged performance readings of the script at a theater in San Francisco. Coppola would also have the actors all convene at his home, or gigantic winery rather, to accomplish various trainings related to their performances. Cary Elwes and the boys would be sent hot air ballooning and horseback riding together to Bond, which is kind of hilarious. Oh, what a life. Oh darn, I have to go drink wine and fly kites with the boys all day. Elsewhere, Oldman was kept separate from everyone as he toiled away at his character, even learning to take his voice an octave lower.
Look what your God has done for me.
Also fun to imagine is the story that Coppola would tell Oldman to whisper strange things to other actors on set while in character just to scare them. It led to some issues, but god damn it, tell me that wouldn't be hilarious to watch from afar. Just Gary Oldman in full makeup leaning over to Keanu Reeves like, "Do you bleed? You will."
Do you bleed? You will.
All this intense preparation and experimentation didn't come without its drama. Oldman and Ryder had a personal falling out one day on set and had trouble working together the rest of the shoot.
No, you, sir. Shall I call the police?
Ryder would later acknowledge that she would later learn he was going through a tough divorce at the time, and the two of them are thankfully friends as of today. All of this strangeness was sure to invite rumors, and it did. Whispers around Hollywood were that Coppola had a brand new castle built on set at Columbia and was starting from scratch. Others claimed audiences were vomiting at test screenings. The truth was, audiences were simply split on what they were watching. This caused Coppola to head to the editing booth, eventually calling up Hart in the middle of the night, desperate for help. In full-on crisis mode, he told Hart that he hated the entire film and needed him to come help edit immediately. His Outsiders editor, Anne Goussard, was also brought on and ended up making changes to just about every scene in the film. Finally, Dracula would release upon the Earth like the Wicked One's shadow across a long hallway in November of 1992. Toting a budget of $40 million, all that sex, blood, and rock and roll proved financially viable. The movie sucked its way to over $215 million worldwide. It need not be spoken the effect the movie has had on pop culture in the years since. As one of the most universally known and referenced vampire films in history, Dracula was received about as well from critics and audiences as you could expect from an art house movie on a massive stage. It wasn't for everyone, but money was made and awards were won. Dracula took home 3 Academy Awards for Best Costume Design, Makeup, and Sound Editing. All in all, you'd have to say things went amazingly well. Maybe for everyone except Keanu. The beloved actor caught a lot of flack for his performance, mostly because of a tough go at the English accent.
I've seen many strange things already. Bloody wolves chasing me through some blue inferno.
It wasn't exactly set up for greatness here. Coppola would later admit that they just wanted a heartthrob actor who would sell tickets in the role, because the part wasn't all that good to begin with. The role that had been originally offered to Christian Slater was one that Reeves probably just wasn't ready for that time in his career. Still yet, Coppola, like anyone else, has nothing but great things to say about Keanu as a person. He lamented that Reeves simply tried too hard to do the part perfectly, and he, as a director, wasn't critical enough of him on set because he liked him so much as a person. We get it, and I think it's safe to say that Keanu has overcome all the backlash.
But now, yeah, I'm thinking I'm back.
I say, is the castle that far? Not at all. We've arrived at our destination, and there's a hungry old man waiting for you inside. That sounded weird. Never mind. Thanks for watching What the Fuck Happened to Bram Stoker's Dracula. The story of Johnny Mnemonic was one of the early standards of cyberpunk literature, and coming off the explosive success of Speed, Keanu Reeves took on the title role opposite action icon Dolph Lundgren. The supporting cast was a solidly talented ensemble that included Ice-T, Henry Rollins, and a laser whip that cut right through characters, bones and all. So how could this promising film adaptation die a death so pitiful that even Casper the Friendly Ghost would spit on its grave? How did Too Many Cooks turn what was meant to be an arty tech noir film into an overcooked, underwhelming mess? And how did it lead to studios greenlighting The Matrix? I need to unload all this data, so stick around and find out what happened to Johnny Mnemonic. In 1981, sci-fi writer William Gibson's story, Johnny Mnemonic, was published in Omni magazine. It introduced the character of Johnny, a courier living in a high-tech fantasy world in 2021. It also introduced cyberpunk at the start of the 80s tech boom. The story was featured in Gibson's collection Burning Chrome, released in 1986. Artist and filmmaker Robert Longo had massive success in the same decade with a series of hyper-realistic drawings titled Men in the Cities. The artwork became such an 80s staple that pieces of it were featured in the satirical horror comedy American Psycho, displayed on the wall of lead character Patrick Bateman's apartment. After directing TV and music videos in the 80s and 90s, Longo wanted to move on to film. A big fan of Gibson's work, he wanted to adapt his popular debut novel, Neuromancer, but he would eventually change directions, as he ultimately felt that the story might be too ambitious for a film. Instead, he chose to take Johnny Mnemonic to the big screen. His intention was to echo the low-budget style of Jean-Luc Godard's 1965 tech-noir film Alphaville, or Chris Marker's 1962 French sci-fi feature La Jetée. Both filmed in black and white, the director envisioned Mnemonic to be colorless as well. But Longo would discover that making a movie in the 90s meant that you're not doing it right unless you're shamelessly burning through stacks of cash. After Longo and Gibson met in 1989, they worked on a few drafts of the script, but they struggled to find funding, as the financiers that they met with preferred to invest in potential blockbusters. After production company Coralco had a box office hit with the Arnold Schwarzenegger film Total Recall, they shortly owned the rights to Johnny Mnemonic. Following some financial matters, however, they sold those rights to Sony Pictures. Funny enough, Sony wanted the film to be more like Total Recall. With its similar sci-fi and action elements, they aimed to rival its major financial success. In 1995, director Robert Longo told Starlog magazine that it is difficult to make art by committee, hinting at the film's behind-the-scenes tension. But he added, "Ultimately, I think it worked out well." In the years since its release, however, Longo has been more upfront about his unpleasant filming experience. The first-time director helplessly watched as his initial vision for Johnny Mnemonic was hacked to pieces like the wood chipper scene in Fargo. The film's credited editor, Ron Sanders, a frequent Cronenberg collaborator, was replaced by a studio-appointed editor whose final cut had a notably different pace. Longo's plan to hire Taxi driver and Raging Bull cinematographer Michael Chapman was also scrapped due to Canadian tax incentives requiring more local hires. Instead, they brought in Francois Protat, whose biggest credit was Weekend at Bernie's, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but there was a clear contrast between Longo's intended dark tech thriller and a comedy about a beach party with a dead host. The casting process was also heavily monitored by Sony, as they wanted stars with multinational outreach, namely Japanese TV and film star Takeshi Kitano, to try and attract a Japanese audience. For the role of the street preacher, U2 lead singer Bono was even considered. But keeping the worldwide box office in mind, Sony ended up hiring action film icon Dolph Lundgren. While Longo didn't agree with the casting choice, he commended Dolph for being a big action star who was willing to take a big risk. With Lundgren on board, Longo and Gibson fleshed out his role a little more. The street-preaching hitman became Karl Honig, a sadistic preacher who refers to himself as Jesus, and wields a knife with a crucifix handle. The sadistic streak apparently continued off-screen. Lead singer of Black Flag, Henry Rollins, played the role of former Dr. Spider. For his fight scene with Carl, Rollins said that Dolph punched him head-on, claiming that said punch caused his thinking to become 20% slower. Though it was an apparent accident, Dolph allegedly told Rollins in response, "Don't worry, you're tough." Meanwhile, Rollins practically had cartoon birds flying around his head. In 2024, Canadian radio show The Strombo Show featured Ice-T, who played J-Bone. He praised Keanu Reeves for his lack of ego and his strong work ethic, and added that though they never had any scenes together, he and Rollins became good friends. Actress Dina Meyer made her film debut as Jane, a character similar to fan favorite Molly Millions from Gibson's novel, Neuromancer. Reportedly, another production company had owned the rights to Neuromancer. Therefore, Sony could not use Molly's name or her specific features, such as retractable blades underneath her fingernails or sealed lenses for enhanced vision. Seasoned character actor Udo Kier was cast as Johnny's handler Ralphie. Though his role is small, it drives the story, and Kier brings all the gravitas that he can to his short screen time, posing as a serious threat, while avoiding mustache-twirling levels of camp. For the title role, Robert Longo actually wanted Val Kilmer, and Kilmer was initially cast, but he vanished into the night to play the lead in 1995's Batman Forever. Then, allegedly, a copy of the script landed on Keanu Reeves' doorstep. The tactic caught his interest, as did the role, and Reeves was cast as the lead. Gibson was satisfied with the casting choice, praising the actor's understanding of the character. The story begins with Johnny visiting a hotel in Beijing, where a group of scientists implant his head with 380 gigs of data. Trying to get their hands on the info, Yakuza members break into the hotel room, shooting the scientists and ripping their body parts off with a laser whip that looks like it took up about a quarter of the film's budget. But Johnny makes a getaway and heads to Newark, New Jersey to unload the data, as it can only stand his head for about another day before killing him. He's followed by Shinji and his men. Jane, a bodyguard in search of her client, helps protect Johnny. The two end up at the headquarters of a group called the Low-Techs, an anti-establishment group who are led by J-Bone, a man who looks like he wandered off the set of Battlefield Earth. Shinji's superior, Takahashi, hires hitman Carl Honig to kill Johnny. Carl is an imposing Swedish man with long blonde hair who looks like a great value Thor. Since Takahashi, Shinji, and the overload of data in Johnny's head are all racing to see who or what can kill Johnny first, Carl's probably gonna bust his Swedish meatballs for nothing. After Jane suffers from convulsions, they visit Spider, a doctor who treats Jane and discovers that the data in Johnny's head is a cure for NAS, aka nerve attenuation syndrome. This is caused by overexposure to electromagnetic radiation. Jane is one of many people afflicted, and the cure is top secret because it could be financially damaging to Pharmacom, whose clients rely on their medicinal relief. The data in Johnny's head needs to be decrypted with 3 photos that work like access cards, but he only has access to one of them. Spider suggests that Johnny C. Jones, a dolphin who was once active in the Navy and now lives at the Low-Tech's base, where an inevitable battle breaks out involving J-Bone, Jane, Johnny, and the men who are trying to kill him. This results in drama, betrayal, secrets exposed, and the laser whip finally being put to good use. Johnny Mnemonic opened Memorial Day weekend 1995 with an underwhelming $7.4 million. The total gross also failed to impress, earning just $19 million on a $26 million budget. Originally slated for a February release, plans changed when Keanu Reeves' action thriller Speed became a monster hit during the filming of Mnemonic. With their lead actor becoming a bona fide movie star, the film was pushed to Memorial Day weekend, which saw the supernatural kid-friendly comedy Casper jump up the top of the charts, while Mnemonic didn't even break the top 5. Critics derided the film for being confusing, cheap, and antiquated despite its futuristic premise. It holds a 20% score on Rotten Tomatoes. The audience score ranks slightly higher with a 30% approval rating, but the film has gained traction since its release, becoming a cult hit. And 25 years after Robert Longo's frustration with the theatrical version, he finally released a cut in black and white. For the film's silver anniversary, Longo planned to upload the film in black and white onto YouTube. After showing this version to Don Carmody, one of the film's producers, Carmody was so excited about it that he actually got the studio involved. Longo, who was hesitant to work with Sony again, was pleasantly surprised to learn how supportive they were of his new version. The studio even provided the original footage, which resulted in Longo and Cyrus Stowe, the movie's colorist, using the original high-resolution footage when regrading it to black and white. The film hit sold-out screenings at the Tribeca and Rockaway Film Festivals in 2021, and in 2022, Sony released the Blu-ray simply titled Johnny Mnemonic in black and white. This was much closer to Longo's original vision, and he was finally happy with the film. When The Matrix was pitched to production companies, the Wachowskis used Johnny Mnemonic as a template, noting that the producers like to hear familiarity instead of untried concepts. Despite Mnemonic's disappointing release, it paved the way for the success of The Matrix, which was a game changer for the film industry and a career changer for Keanu Reeves. Another high point for Longo and Reeves was Johnny's room service tirade.
Room service!
His character was extremely frustrated at that point, as were Longo and Gibson. While not originally in the script, Longo suggested the idea and Gibson wrote it overnight. It became the most memorable scene in the movie, and Longo's personal favorite. The rant may perfectly embody the film's main purpose, which is escapism. Sometimes, amidst life's absurdity, the most cathartic release is to stop and yell at the top of your lungs how much you just want f***ing room service.
Vanity is definitely my favorite sin.
He was not the megastar we all know and love now.
You don't really want to go back to Florida, though, do you?
He was approached for the part multiple times and turned it down multiple times.
I don't like it here, Kevin.
It's my time now.
The late 1990s had an odd fascination with the devil and the end of days that gave audiences all kinds of crazy films with varied levels of success. Most of these seem to come out right around 1999, the end of the millennium, when people were starting to panic. However, some of these end of days films came out earlier and set the trend. 1997 was an odd year that saw the release of Dante's Peak, The Devil's Own, Volcano, the original Open Your Eyes, 7 Years in Tibet, and a bunch more. There was a trend for the end of days, but also a search for religion, which then led to the perfect storm of both, with The Devil's Advocate. A bit end of days, a bit of religious mayhem, and a whole lot of cautionary tale. In 1997, folks were getting ready for the big millennium change, but not quite as scared as some would get come 1999. There was a bit of apprehension, but the madness hadn't all started yet. Still, religious horror films had been around for a long, long time, and getting one more was not exactly surprising. The Exorcist and its sequels, The Wicker Man, The Believers, and many others had come and gone, some leaving more of a mark than others did. Movies about the devil or Lucifer had come and gone the same way, including some about the devil's children or the devil wanting children. One only needs to see The Omen or Rosemary's Baby for that. We even had movies about Paradise Lost, such as The Crow, and there is even a film in Limbo that would directly adapt the piece and be directed by Alex Proyas. So, is The Devil's Advocate about Paradise Lost? Well, yes and no. It's definitely not a direct adaptation of the poem by John Milton, but it does connect in multiple ways with it. The story here is that of a young lawyer, Kevin Lomax, from Florida, who's offered a huge opportunity in New York City for one of the biggest law firms there is, and under a mysterious man named John Milton. As the young man convinces his wife to go to New York City with him, the opportunity he's offered seems to be a bit more unusual than expected. There, they meet people of power, people with ridiculous amounts of money, and people with very low morality. This is a brand new world for them, and while Mr. Lomax has some inner searching to do while things are being offered to him, his wife seems to lose her mind as she attempts to be supportive. The new boss is no cakewalk either, seemingly knowing more than he should and obviously ready to do just about anything to reach his end goal. And, as with any good movie about evil beings wanting to keep going on, there's a lineage angle to it all. A bit like Coffin Joe, John Milton is as obsessed with having his bloodline go on, no matter what. And, well, there's the spoiler alert, very Star Wars twist coming that won't shock all that many viewers, to be honest. So, with that out of the way, what happened to this movie? Why is it of interest? Well, the devil is in the details. Looking at the numbers, the film should be considered a hit. The budget for The Devil's Advocate was right around $57 million, and the box office total for it is $153 million. So, just under 3 times its budget, giving some leeway for marketing and distribution costs, as well as other costs never discussed, while still having some profit left over. The film released in prime devil season, right in the middle of October, with a solid marketing move, even if other horror films were coming out that month. The box office for the weekend of its release, October the 17th, 1997, shows The Devil's Advocate at number 2, pulling in just under $16.5 million. And number 1, another new release that week and another horror film, I Know What You Did Last Summer, which pulled in just over $20 million. The big difference between the two films? Well, one was aiming at a more adult horror audience, while the other was aiming at teenagers and young adults. This is the prime horror audience to this day. So, it was easy to guess that I Know What You Did Last Summer would win at the box office. Right behind them were the previous week's numbers 1 and 2, Kiss the Girls and 7 Years in Tibet. If we take a look at the following week's box office, the rankings for the weekend of October the 24th, 1997, remained exactly the same, with The Devil's Advocate in second, making $13.5 million. Week 3 kept the same top 2, The Devil's Advocate made just about $10 million, and at week 4, the fall down the charts started with the 4th position, showing behind I Know What You Did Last Summer, Bean, yes, that Bean, jumping at number 2 after coming out on the same date as The Devil's Advocate, something possibly due to Halloween season being over. At number 1, Starship Troopers. All in all, The Devil's Advocate had a solid box office return, declining week to week as would be expected for horror in November. These days, the cast of this film would sell out more screenings than a lot of other movies. But in 1997, Al Pacino had a solid following, but Keanu Reeves has not hit his biggest hit yet and was not known as Neo or John Wick. He was the guy most people saw as Ted from the Bill and Ted movies, or as Jonathan Harker from Coppola's Dracula, or as the lead from Speed and Point Break, but he was not the megastar we all know and love now. We knew much less about him, and he was one of many men in their early 30s vying for the public's attention. He was a great choice here, but not necessarily the obvious one. Case in point, the film's production. While under Joel Schumacher, had considered hiring Brad Pitt, Edward Norton, Christian Slater, and John Cusack for the part of Kevin Lomax. As for the part of John Milton, it wasn't easy to get Al Pacino for it. He was approached for the part multiple times and turned it down multiple times. Eventually, the script was reworked a few times and he became more interested. Not before suggesting that Robert Redford or Sean Connery should play the part instead. However, the film as we know it was meant to have him. But the budget didn't agree with this, and there wasn't quite enough to get Mr. Pacino for the part of John Milton. All was not lost though, as this is a Keanu Reeves movie, and something people didn't know at the time, and we do know now, is how he gets what he wants by just being a nice guy. Here, he wanted Pacino as a co-star, so he accepted a reduced salary for his part so that the budget could be there to pay for Pacino. In a happy turn of events, when Pacino found out about this, he took the amount that would have been Reeves and donated it to charity. Some would say, why not give it back to Reeves? Well, have you read about the man in the last few years? Yeah, he didn't need it and was okay with the money not going to himself. And he's a charity giving kind of guy, so it made sense then and makes even more sense now. Joining the leads here is someone who is more of a newcomer on the scene and a lot younger than expected. She was to play Lomax's wife, so with Keanu Reeves being 31, it would have been logical to expect someone around his age. However, talent won over age, and maybe a touch of beauty here, leading to 21-year-old Charlize Theron being chosen for the part. Her own career was just beginning, with only 5 roles before this one, including one horror film, Children of the Corn 3, Urban Harvest, thus proving that just about every A-lister has a bad horror film on their resume. She wasn't super well known, she wasn't the star we know her to be now, she hadn't been nominated for any Oscars or won one. She was a pretty girl with loads of talent and potential. She was also a newcomer who was worried about the nudity required for this film. She's since admitted that she's discussed this with her mother, as the part called for nudity, full frontal in a church even, which is something that could kill her career this early on and could limit her work for years to come. This was a major risk. She weighed the pros and cons and eventually she went for it. As a side note, the nudity in the church scene was done with a priest's approval, who thought that this was the logical place for someone who's lost to go to look for guidance. This central cast here is a large part of why the film works and why people keep going back to it. Now, looking at the behind the scenes talent, starting with the director, there is talent in abundance. The director here is Taylor Hackford, whose name is not instantly recognisable, but a quick look at his resume shows solid films and some random choices, including Against All Odds in 1984 and Dolores Claiborne in 1995. He'd also directed a bunch of music videos, which seems to be a rite of passage for most horror directors. Since The Devil's Advocate, he's directed a slew of films including Ray in 2004 and Parker in 2013, showing that his work is, well, all over the place. In terms of writers, the movie's based on a novella by Andrew Niederman, who also wrote the source material for Pin in 1988, The Maddening 1995, and Tender Love and Care from 1996. Adapting the novella were Jonathan Lemkin and Tony Gilroy. Lemkin had previous credits that show a seemingly solid career with Moonlighting, Hill Street Blues, and 21 Jump Street before The Devil's Advocate. Gilroy, for his part, had done movies including The Cutting Edge, Dolores Claiborne, and Extreme Measures. There was plenty of talent to go around here, but these men were not necessarily household names at the time. With all this talent involved, how did the film do with critics and the public? Well, the public seemed to like it enough, with 80% of them liking it according to Rotten Tomatoes, if the stats from that website hold any weight for you. As for the critics, they were not all on board. The film currently stands at 63%, with a consensus that seems to say it's just okay, with some decent supernatural elements, while being too ambitious for its own good. So, as with many other films out there, the public seems to have liked it more than the critics, and shown that at the box office for a few weeks when the film was first released. At this point, the film's finding new audiences through their love of Keanu Reeves, something they can't be blamed for, and the added nostalgia for the 1990s that's been seeping into pop culture lately. The film is a solid one with some issues here and there. It's a fun watch to get to see a very young Charlize Theron be a badass.
I don't care!
And Keanu Reeves do his thing, while Al Pacino oversees the whole thing in his own unique way.
What is your favorite Keanu Reeves movie that's not named The Matrix or John Wick? Let us know in the comments and party on, dude. Wait, wrong movies.
Party on, dudes!
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.